next panel, why conscious leadership wins. One that I think has really become more and more important in the recent years as people have realized that a lot of times what may have been the idea of what good leadership was really wasn't something that was sustainable or successful, and caused a lot of hurt and pain for all kinds of people in the last 5, 10, 15 years, but that there is a better way to do it. And so Kaylee Klemp, an absolute expert and wonderful thought leader on this, is going to be interviewed by the person that I'm going to introduce and let him introduce Kaylee. But it's an absolute pleasure to introduce Matt McCall, partner at Pritzker Group, also managing partner at Forge Capital, somebody that I've had absolute pleasure getting to know here in the last couple months as he's recently become, well, I guess not that recently, we always forget with COVID where years are, but become a part of the Colorado community, and an absolute great individual, and someone I'm so proud that we have an opportunity to engage with today. And with that, I'll turn it off to Matt and Kaylee.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. So the genesis of this was kind of part of a journey that I'd been through the last 10 years of the blue ribbon chasing, best school, the best this. It just got exponentially harder and harder and harder. And I got to a point where like the only next blue ribbon was the Midas list. And the way you make the Midas list is you get outrageously lucky with some unicorn that is worth 20 billion. And you just get exhausted. And I thought to myself, there has to be a better way. And so I started talking to other friends of mine who had clearly burned out in their late 30s, early 40s. And we all had the same thing, which was this is not a self-sustaining, reaffirming model here that we're taught. And so when I started approaching the conscious leadership concept or approach, it wasn't to do the right thing or to be conscious or any of that. I'm a VC, 27 years, 80 companies, tons of unicorns. It is purely, it is Darwinianly advantaged at the end of the day. And we're going to talk a little bit about this. It's both the right thing to do, but it's also competitive advantage at the same time. As I always say, when John Mackey got the flywheel going on Whole Foods, Safeway was screwed, right? The same day they shut down all the Midwest, he opened up 5,000 new grocery stores, right? So we also interviewed 100 entrepreneurs and said, how do you want your VCs to show up? Number one was, who is there for me on a Sunday night when the ghosts are going through my head? Number two was, this is Michael Dubin, Dollar Shave Club, when I go from 1 to 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 to 100 million in sales, the imposter is telling me I'm not enough. And I need to be a superhero. Help me be the highest version of myself. So I'm like, wait a second. That's human capital stack. That's not strategic. That's not tactical. Not how to run SEO. Not how to fundraise. But the real game is on the human side. And so that's when I started getting coached. Ironically, one of my top coaching program that I got certified in, or that I've been trained in, she wrote the book on. Literally, she wrote the book on. And when we surveyed our CEOs, 1/3 of them that had coaches were CLG coached players. It's the top program in the Valley right now. So I thought, what better than to have a session here around something that everyone's like, God, I really wish that sounds right, but I don't trust it, right? Like that sounds like, the anxiety, fear-driven approach is going to eat that approach for lunch. And guess what? It doesn't. So that was the genesis of the talk, and it changed my life forever. And hopefully Kaylee and her wisdom will, in some way, change yours. So,
awesome.
There we go.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the things I just wanted to start with is when I coach my entrepreneurs, one of the things I focus on is energy. Does what you're doing energize you or drain you? Because at the end of the day, you can only go so long with something draining you, and you've got to change it. So be aware of, like with a battery, right? So you talk a lot about drama and energy and things like that. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I think that there's two different ways to think about energy, both of which are really important, especially as you're thinking about growing your organizations. So one is the place where you started. being aware of the things that give you energy and the things that drain your energy, and having those same conversations with the people who you're partnered with. Because one of the things that happens that I think is so fascinating is that I will just assume that the things that I dislike are the things that everyone dislikes, and the things that I love are the things that everyone loves. And it seems like an obvious thing, and yet in having the conversation, we'll have people map along a continuum where their joy goes up and down. How much complementary is there that gets missed? The second piece that you're talking about, I think, is even perhaps more interesting, is to look at what are the subtle ways that you're losing tons of energy. So in conscious leadership, one of the things that we talk about is the victim, villain, hero triangle. And if you want to think about that, you could imagine that instead of claiming 100% responsibility, there are 3 places you could go. One is to the victim, and the victim is the role that says, life is happening to me. And through the glasses of life is happening to me, I'm helpless, and it's hard, and there's a struggle, and really Matt is the one who's creating all the issues in my life.
Well, it's actually true.
It might
but
be.
I'm a VC.
Right, the villain, meanwhile, is the one that blames, right? It's your fault. I can't believe you did that. There's something that's wrong here. I'm going to find out who did it, and I'm going to blame them for it. The inner critic is a version of the villain. Or the sneakiest role is the hero, the one that sort of jumps in and does for and rescues and saves the day, but only creates temporary relief. And I talk about this so early because it's one of the foundational tools that I love in understanding energy, because it's so energetically expensive to spend time in drama in any of those 3 roles.
But it feels so good, doesn't it? Like you literally get a dopamine hit. Oh, they did this to me. I mean, a good gossip.
Oh yeah, gossip is highly engaging. The adrenaline that comes when I can rescue somebody, right? And then the martyrdom that comes with it. Matt, do you know how hard it is to be the only person who knows how to work our IT stack?
Do you realize how much I've done for you? Why are you not appreciating it?
I mean, so gratitude practice, you should do some this way, right?
There we go. Actually, good. So you have a great quote, which we were talking about this, again, kind of, it's really easy to talk about good and evil, and like, there's the evil way of capitalism, and there's a good way of conscious leadership, and can you feel that? Like, do we all just that indignation that we get over, like, them and us and all this stuff? And you said, oh, no, capitalism's great, just play capitalism.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So I think I split my time in a couple different places. I spent a lot of my time one-on-one executive coaching. I spent a lot of time with corporate teams. I spent time with YPO forums. I spent time with couples. In almost every circle where I run, people are playing the game of capitalism. And I would argue that everyone here, if you're starting a company, you're playing the game of capitalism. That those are the metrics in the country where we're choosing to play. The catch, as you're talking about it, is whether or not I'm playing the game or the game is playing me. It's actually kind of fun to be able to look at your numbers, to be able to look at your CAC, to be able to look at your lifetime value of your customers, right? There's really interesting data, really fun ways to play with it that don't always feel fun if I'm not playing, if it's not a game, if it defines every ounce of who I am, and it's sort of happening to me. The numbers determine whether I'm okay. That's a really different feel. And I imagine you've seen that. You've worked with a number of companies. How does that show up in your world?
It's funny. So by the way, the book is the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And as you go through, by the way, the 15 commitments, you're like, wait, this isn't like, be good to humankind. This is a series of how to have a functional life and a functional organization, to have communication, to be energized, and actually to be the highest version of yourself so that you're Whole Foods, not Safeway, right? One of the commitments I'd love to talk about in a second, but is this notion of having to be right So the idea you talk about is you can either be above the line, I commit to above the line, abundance, trust, love, whatever it happens to be. The world is for me, through me, etc. Or below the line, scarcity and fear and life happens to me and I've got to be paranoid. I mean, as I say that, you get kind of exhausted, right? And so the idea is stay above the line and you end up actually with a better firm. So this idea of being right versus being curious, guess what? Just be clear what you're doing and commit to it. But the phrase I always use is, someone just lost a sale. I have to be right. I did this wrong. Oh my God, we lost the customer. I literally sat down with the CEO, and by the time he was done, we'd lost an account, we're going to lose all the accounts, the company's going to go under. This is the Sunday night talk. Yeah. He was going to have to let go of all 50 people. His wife was going to look at him like a complete loser. And then after she divorced him, his dad was going to say, I told you you'd never amount to a thing. Right? I said, okay, that's one way to look at it. Good story. You were wrong, not right. How about this? Be curious. Because how in the hell could I be curious? I just lost the account. So the phrase I always make them say is, pardon my French, ain't that a friggin' hoot? He's like, what? I said, yeah, say, ain't that a hoot? I just lost a $50 million sale. Huh, that is so funny. What happened? Well, as soon as you do that, now you're like, huh, how'd that happen? And you detach from being right or wrong, and you get curious about what happened. What are the lessons to be learned? Suddenly you notice we have 98 other companies in the portfolio, right? Oh my God, the thing that we lost in this one will make certain we don't lose these 6, right? On and on and on and on. But if you go below the line, by the time you're done, you're homeless selling apples on the street corner and you're making horrible, horrible decisions. Yeah. So like that's an example in terms of playfulness where when I say get playful, get curious, they look at me like, no, no, this is a serious business.
Right, yeah.
How do you coach people around this? Like, no, don't make this a serious business.
So I love the way that you just described that, Matt. Basically, if everyone wants to just sort of hold in your own mind's eye a line, and above the line, exactly as you were saying, hold, I wonder what I can learn from this. And below the line, hold, there is right and wrong, and I have to be right. And then all the conversations flow from that. So in the situation where I just lost a client, if I have to be right and it's a world of scarcity, then really like I'm about, I don't know, 6 unlucky things from, I think, living under a bridge. Mm-hmm. Whereas if the question that introduces the whole conversation is, what can I learn from this? Sometimes in the moment, play is one of the greatest shift moves. And sometimes in the moment, the person isn't quite yet ready to make light of, but they can inquire. What can I learn from this? How did I show up? How does that reflect on the rest of the portfolio? What can I take from this conversation and apply elsewhere? I think that the most significant thing that you named that I would love for everyone to imagine is it's essentially a set of glasses. So if you think about walking outside on a really bright sunny day, if you put on sunglasses, it's helpful. If you walk outside and it's a cloudy day and it's raining and you put on sunglasses, it makes it even harder to see. It's not that there's one set of glasses that's perfect for every situation. It's recognizing which glasses help you see more clearly. And above the line, in that space of curiosity, abundance, that's where you'll start to have access to more sets of glasses. Can I look at this from the opposite perspective? Can I look at this from play? Can I look at what I can learn? Below the line, at least in my experience, you essentially get one set of glasses. And the set of glasses is, this is wrong, there's a problem, I have to be right, I must defend, right? And my ego is super freaked out. Oof. And when my ego is freaked out, exactly to your point, I make short-term, pretty self-centered decisions, which might work in the teeny tiny short term, they just don't usually end up creating collaboration and creativity and all the pieces that anybody who's hanging out with us here today, I think, wants for your organization.
And when I go back to, this actually is right up there with culture and profitability and everything else, like literally is essential. Because here's where, at least in the startup world, startups are always on that thin line of extinction, right? Unlike a big company that's political with huge cash flows. And so eventually Darwin always shows up, right? So you can pull the wool over your own eyes for only so long until the law of gravity comes in and you go under, right? So all of consciousness, conscious leadership is about is just going in with your eyes wide open, having open dialogue, making certain that you're getting the best from people, right? And you're not pretending and pontificating, because guess what? You can do all of that and you can just crush it politically. It's your fault, not my fault, all that stuff. And guess what? The company will go under, right? So that's what I love about it. This is literally like essential for the survival of businesses. And so in the terms of the I'm right or wrong, you got a couple of choices. I'm not enough. I messed up the sale. I'm a horrible person. I'm going to stick my head in the sand. I'm not even going to come to work. Whatever. I'm not going to show up fully. Well, Darwin's like, oh, baby, this is good, right? He's not going to close the other sales either. Like, I've got this one. Or finger pointing. I'm enough, but it's her fault, right? Now Darwin's like, oh, good, we get a pit fight, because guess what? Then they're going to fight and then point to them and to them and to them. And now you've got a two-front war, internal and external. Problem with startups is you can't afford internal.
And that, I think, gets back to your first question, that the reason that you can't afford it is because of the energy involved. That all of the time and energy and attention that you're, well, hi, friends. We got a live concert, too. All the energy, they're welcome. All the energy that you're putting into all of those sort of internal debates is time you don't have to focus on, thank you, it's time you don't have to focus on the external competition. And just try this on in your own experience. How many times has it been 10 o'clock where you could have been strategizing a sale or strategizing a conversation with a potential partner, and instead what came through was a Slack or a message or something that was like, can you believe that Matt did such and such, or so-and-so was claiming budget that I thought was mine, or that FTE, that was supposed to go to my team, and all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of energy that's going to the internal drama that's no longer available for you to be strategizing to do the things that, if you were aligned and having those candid conversations, might be possible.
So what are some of the, so there are 15 commitments, but what are the handful that you think are kind of like, would have the biggest impact if come tomorrow morning, I'm saying, I'm just going to do a couple.
Yeah. The book is organized in such a way that if you read the first 2 chapters, then you get to choose commitments after that. But I highly recommend starting with the first 2. So commitment number 1 is about 100% responsibility, which is what we were just talking about. It's 100% responsibility lives above the line, which is the question that I would ask that says, what's my part in this? How am I a co-creator in this experience? It's actually interesting, even just being on stage, watching what 100% responsibility looks like for people here. If anyone's ever traded places where you're the person leading a meeting, or you're the person giving a talk, and the room leans back and they do some version of like, all right, Kaylee, all right, Matt, be brilliant. Say wise things, right? Or in your meeting, they're like, lead us. And then they just forfeit responsibility. You can feel how that doesn't actually create 100% responsibility or co-creation in your organization. Below the line, victim, villain, hero, that's what we're talking about, we discussed before. If you can start to identify and shift out of drama and back to 100% responsibility, I think that's game changer number 1. Right next door, sort of connected to it, is the idea of curiosity being above the line versus defensiveness below the line, right? Or life is happening by me above the line, happening to me below the line. Engaging in conversations, just even with the awareness of, what's my interpretive lens? Hey, Kaylee, you're wearing blue. Why would you wear that, right? Wait, do you need my shirt? Does anybody, they have startup shirts here. But just recognizing.
It's not orange though.
Failed. Bronco colors? Yeah. Recognizing how I hear. Am I hearing through a lens of defensiveness, or am I hearing through a lens of curiosity? And then am I engaging with 100% responsibility or in drama? Those 2, I think, are the foundation. If I were gonna layer my favorite on top of that,
Oh, here we go.
is candor. That candor is about how am I communicating? And I think that the easiest definition most people go to is, well, is what you're saying honest? Is what you're saying true? And what I think is extremely powerful is that, at least in my experience, that's not enough. And in conscious leadership, we really layer sort of 3 interlocking circles, the Venn diagram. One is what I'm saying honest, right? Is what I am saying true? Versus am I lying? Am I misrepresenting? Am I saying untruths? In some ways, that seems like a low bar to clear, but in some organizations, maybe not.
We do white truths. We fool ourselves and then convey it.
There we go, right?
Right.
I passed the lie detector test. The second piece is what I am saying complete. Is it the whole truth? Versus is it a partial truth? Is it sort of the like, well, it's a lie by omission? There are sort of funny examples that you can use for this. This is the version that's like, hey, I had lunch with somebody I knew in high school. That might be true, but what I miss if I'm not complete is, and they just started a new company and they're looking for someone with my skill set. That's a radically different conversation.
Or I've dated her for 12 years and she wants to
she
get back
looks
together again.
good. So honesty plus completeness. And then the third piece is self-awareness. Am I aware of my motives? Do I know why I'm sharing this with you? Am I projecting? Oops. Am I blaming? Sort of, am I defending? Or one of my favorites is, am I manipulating?
Digging, yeah.
I had this fabulous conversation with my mother once where I was like, Mom, you're manipulating all of us by giving us different versions of the story. She's like, oh, Kaylee, it's not manipulation if it's for good.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yes, Mom, it is. But even can I bring that level of awareness? And if in our organizations we can create not only honesty, but completeness and self-awareness, it's a radically different conversation around all the content that you're deciding. Hey, should we open that office in Boulder? Hey, should we open that office in Chicago? Hey, should we shift our approach to the market, Hey, do we need a new GTM motion? That's a really different conversation if everyone is engaging with full candor.
And there's interesting in terms of the 100% responsibility. By the way, no more, no less.
Right.
So don't take on someone else's responsibility.
Wait, did you have a monkey? Because I could just carry that on my back.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, I know that you're not looking at it, so let me take that one over. It's my fault as well that the monkey's on your back. I should have done the following. But what's interesting when you're aware of that is, so I had recently a very, we've talked about, but very personal situation where the relationship just went awry, right? And I felt indignant. I went below the line, shoulds and shouldn'ts, and I did the following and whatever, right? We all do this at work, personal, whatever, right? Pointing the finger. So when I finally calmed down, Marcus Aurelius has this great concept called the equanimity game. How quickly can you get back to ground when triggered? The monks and the functional MRI machines go, and they're right back to where they were. So I was like, okay, down there. How do I think about this? What was my role? How am I complicit in that which I complain about? Because we all are, right? And so I started to lay that out, and I just took 100% responsibility for my part in it. I said, hey, I didn't show up in a way that I'm proud of in these ways, and I'm sorry. Not with the expectation that anyone on the other side would say anything else, right? Because now you're feeling entitlement and all this stuff. As soon as I did that and I took responsibility for my action, I'll be damned if what didn't come up was, well, I know I don't want to do that stuff again. So I'll vow not to do this, this, and this, and I'm going to be aware that I have these triggers and these actions and these patterns. Holy cow, I've got a pattern I didn't know about, right? So suddenly when you go away from it's their fault and blaming and not taking responsibility, you're losing out on an opportunity to grow, right? And Darwin loves it because he's like, oh man, next opportunity with your boss or whatever, this is going to be epic, right? But if you make it conscious, and you're intentional, suddenly, guess what? You become more functional. Communication gets better. You become more self-aware. And guess what? The organization gets less dramatic. So.
Yeah. You named something that I think is so powerful, which is as we lay out this notion of are you above the line or below the line, I think sometimes unintentionally there gets to be a connotation that it is good to be above the line and it is bad to be below the line, and you should be above the line all the time. I'm not friends with the Dalai Lama. It's possible that you are. I am not friends with the Dalai Lama someday. But I don't know.
I do have a story about it.
I love stories. I don't know anyone who has gone above the line and just stays there permanently. The goal is instead to get really familiar with my patterns, to get familiar with the ways that I go below the line. I think it's Ram Dass who talks about being a connoisseur of his patterns. And this notion of like, oh shoot, I did that thing that I do. I catch myself below the line, and the game, the goal, is how quickly can I shift back? Can that tour...
And are you willing?
Yes, and that tour of the negative thoughts, it's their fault, what did I do, it's on me, let me rescue, whatever it is, when it goes from months to weeks to days to hours to minutes to just a moment, to me, that's how I know, wow, I've really been practicing and I've grown so much to come back above the line. And sometimes, Matt just mentioned, are you willing? Sometimes I'm not willing. Sometimes I am below the line, I'm in a blaming mindset, I've figured out whose fault it is, and I'm gonna righteously blame them, and I'm gonna tell you how wrong they are, and I'm gonna suffer for it, and then I'm gonna be at the effective and in a victim space, and usually the people who I love will be like, you've got 2 minutes, go ahead.
That's what the Navy SEALs do, by the way. That's their
Oh, I
routine.
didn't know that.
Mark Devine, SEAL Team 6 commander, he's like, when the shit hits the fan, we'll give you 30 seconds to center, say, crap, whatever, and he goes, now we still have to land on the beach, right? Yeah. So the war starts now. Yeah. How quickly? Regarding the Dalai Lama, so there's a guy I got to know back in Chicago named Richie Davidson.
Oh, I know Richie.
And Richie is one of the top neuroscientists in the world. And he partnered with the Dalai Lama, and they sent monks over who lived in cages. And he did functional MRIs of their brains, and then he would shock the system and see what they did. And then he took students and he'd shock the system with them and see how they were doing. And then students that hadn't meditated, right? And what was interesting is, it was like clashing and gong while they were in the machine. The monks spiked, amygdala fired, and then straight back down. Back down. Students who had meditated spiked and attenuated. By the time they were out of the thing, they'd come back, their heart rate had come back down the whole bit. The ones who hadn't meditated spiked, and they were still in the thick of the fight before. So they literally went to class with that still in their system. And as he said, when you spike with fear, your prefrontal cortex, which does the advanced thinking, shuts down, right? Because the dinosaur is going to eat you. Let's not talk about meaning and purpose and whatever. Back to the amygdala, vision literally compresses. Like the physiological effect of fight or flight is insane. And you literally are unable to have abstract thought. Is this where you want to be making decisions from? No. So we asked him, Richie, you spent so much time with the Dalai Lama. Just what do you think? Like, give us a vignette of when you think of him. You hit the nail on the head. He said, we're walking down a road, and there's this crippled child with his mother. And he leaned over, and he was present, and he looked at her, and the tears flowed, and he hugged her, and he was there with the child, and he reassured the child what they were going through, and he got up, and within 3 steps was laughing again. You know, that notion of you're still carrying her, the whole Buddhist story crossing the river. How often does something happen to us and we are still carrying it with us 2 days later, right? Which means, guess what? We got robbed of being present. We got robbed of being able to focus on what is important to us. We got robbed of intentionality. And Darwin, again, is like, oh, this is great. Just stay in the drama, don't fix the problem, and I get the company.
Yeah, completely. I think that it will certainly show up in really dramatic ways around whether the company makes it. I think it also shows up in terms of whether I'm bringing the questions or the struggles that I'm having at work home and the questions I have at home to work. And while I wouldn't necessarily advocate for like pure compartmentalization as a strategy, there is something about, am I fully present? Am I with the person that I'm with? And it's a really powerful question, even just to ask next time you're leading a team meeting, to take 15 or 30 seconds and then ask people, are you all here? Or is part of you still in the meeting that we finished right before this? Is part of you still driving here? Is part of you still parking? Is part of you still with one of your kiddos? Like, is part of you not here? And it's not that it's right or wrong, it's recognizing how unfortunate to be working on creative strategy or collaboration or solving questions if you're not even here.
Yeah, it's funny. I just did my blog post announcing today the official launch of Forge Capital, and I said, and I wasn't going to. Last night I was like, holy cow! I'm with my coach in front of all you. Feels right. And the idea of Forge was if you took a coaching platform and had a love child with a venture platform, what would that look like in terms of being able to show up fully for entrepreneurs? You could do the strategic, the tactical, and the human columns. And so, for me, I thought, what better? And then, of course, the website crashed. But other than that, but having, I think I need an intervention at this juncture. 600 books are out, all this kind of stuff. I said, what is the test at the end of the day for me? Yeah. And the one that I use, and I'd love to get your take as you think about this, like to live the good life. I call it the St. Peter test. And you replace it with whatever you want. The amoeba test. It's whatever is there when you get hit by a bus and you go upstairs and have to talk about your life in front of the pearly gates, or whatever the equivalent is. You had to describe your last 2 months, last week, last month. Would you be defensive? Would you be like, well, yeah, no, I was kind of head down and I kind of screwed a bunch of people over, but look at all the money I made. I did this. Well, were you happy? Were you energized? Do you like what you're doing? Were you intentional, right? Were you intentional? Were you energized? Were you present? Are the three things I ask. And if you're not, right, St. Peter literally is going to say, or whoever, the amoeba, you're kidding me, right? Like, you're friggin' kidding me. I gave you Colorado. I gave you the blue skies 310 days a year. I gave these amazing people as a community. Kaylee's just up in Boulder. Like, just go up, talk to her. And you did that? You literally spent the last 24 hours doing that? Getting revenge, thinking about this, doing something you hated, blah, blah, blah. And so that's, so as I kind of think about the overarching one, that's kind of my final kind of test. I can try and justify everything, but I don't know, how do you think about that?
I think less far out. I think that almost every weekend, my husband and I go hiking. And we have our favorite path. Anybody who's from Boulder, we go up Gregory Canyon and we end up at Chautauqua. And at the end of our hike, there's this one turn, which is this is our life turn. And at that turn, every week, we have the conversation, most of the time rooted in gratitude, that says, this is our life. We live in Colorado. We're hiking on a trail. We're healthy enough to be hiking on a trail. We do work that we love. Our kiddo is healthy. And just being able to go through the pieces of our life for which we have so much gratitude, I think both reminds us to hold perspective and inspires us both in the week past and the week forward. Where do I want to place my attention? Which doesn't mean that things are always perfect. There are absolutely the moments where my heart is broken, that I'm working with an aging parent with significant memory loss. That doesn't make it where it's like, yay, goody.
Playful time, no.
But it does help hold perspective around, how have I engaged? Was it with love? Was it in a way that when I say, this is our life, this is my life, that I feel that sense of satisfaction and contentment?
I love that. There was a clip I did in my post which is the One Republic I Lived in a video. And I thought, love the song. Every morning I play it, bouncing the rebounder, kind of getting the physiology going. So yeah, I wonder what the video's like. I'm going to put it in the post. Have you seen that video?
I haven't.
Has anyone here seen the One Republic? I'm like, I'm crying. I'm like, oh my God, life's so precious. I think and hate Ryan Tedder for doing this to me.
You know it's good when you can't actually speak. You just kind of moan in various phrases.
It starts with this boy putting this vest on and doing this. He's got MS. I mean, got cystic fibrosis, and he knows he only has till he's 36 to live. And he talks about how every day is precious to him. And then, of course, he starts playing it, and then it shows him as a child and with his dad and the loving moments. And I'm like, that crap I was just worrying about yesterday, and this kid is like, okay, perspective, right? So if you can't find it, anyways, I Live, you can download it. And if you don't cry, that's fine. Maybe it's just, the sensitivity.
We'll judge you from below the line. There's something wrong with you if you don't cry.
He's less than. That's fine. I'll still fire people. No. But so, by the way, this is all really good and feels warm and fuzzy. But, if I lose my fear, if I lose my drive, right? If that anxiety isn't there keeping me going, only the paranoid survive, dog eat dog, the anxietal assholes are going to eat me alive, right? Like, this is all bunk, new age stuff.
I think that the proof in many respects is in the pudding, in the sense that many of the organizations that I most admire, that you most admire, that many people most admire, recognize that fear as a driver only gets you so far. And I will acknowledge, fear as a driver will get you to a certain point. That adrenaline, the anxiety, that can get you up in the morning, that can sort of break the paralysis of procrastination, but it's energetically extremely expensive. And most people who run on fear, they break. And so there's a point where it takes you to a certain point and then it falls down. Versus the Genentechs, the G2s, the Asanas, where they recognize if we can instead have people feel pulled, have people feel called. It sounds cheesy, but to have people in your organization run more on love, more on meaning than on fear, it's actually unbelievable to watch what's possible. I think about it a little bit like uphill and downhill.
Yeah.
That the energy that's required to walk uphill is a lot like running on fear. You can do it, but wow, is it expensive, versus when you're running downhill, that's running on love. Where it's not that you aren't doing hard things, it's that the way it feels is so different.
And, it's so funny because there's a group of us, as I told you, it was called the Karma Club. And if you kind of looked at what we did, we were very, very successful at what we did. I kid you not, I had a wall in my office, top 100 VC, top 40 power player in Hollywood, media, every article, 40 under, you name it. And I was always like, when's the next award? Like, when's the next blue ribbon? Yeah. And I was getting sicker and sicker. I was having things break down. I was just tireder and tireder. I was getting to a point where chronic fatigue was kicking in, right? Because it was getting more and more exponential. And I had this snap moment. Yeah. Now, my version, I have some buddies who, people that I know, we all have them, where they turn to drugs and alcohol. You anesthetize one way or the other, right? And in my case, I just looked at the wall. I said, what the heck? What is it? I literally took everything down, threw it in the garbage can, and I put up a Joseph Campbell poster. It says, we have to be willing to let go of the life we plan to embrace the life that's awaiting us. Finding Joe. This is another phenomenal movie. So remember, buy her book, One Republic, Finding Joe. It's free on Netflix, on YouTube. And suddenly I felt this, and I was like, okay, now I'm never going to see another good deal the rest of my life, right? Because I'm not driven. I'm not as long as I was like, no deal is going to get done in this market without me. My next deal, Coinbase. I was like, huh, who'd have thought that one? Biggest one yet. And actually, they started getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's kind of along this notion of the universe listens to what you expect. Right? And if you expect drama and tension and this and that, versus you kind of expect it to come, this is the law of venture. Like entrepreneurs feel they deserve and expect. Now you got to make sure there's not psychosis, but they're like, when I was at DFJ, we seeded all of Elon's companies. I was on a board with Elon for 5 years. Elon gets up in the morning and he's like, well, of course the rocket's going to happen. I just need to figure it out. And he would do stuff like, I was sitting talking to him and he's like, closing his eyes, he's going like this. Because we need new leather on the steering wheel. Like, were you literally just feeling the steering wheel? And he goes, and I hate the reading light. It just hit the window. And I was like, things are created twice, once in your head and once in reality. And so people who get out of the drama mode and get into the creator mode just assume that's going to happen, right? Water finds its level.
Well, I think many people might have also had a similar moment. I don't know that you felt the leather on the steering wheel, but anyone who's ever had a breakthrough insight in the shower, right? Or had a breakthrough insight on a long road trip where you've been driving for a while, or on a long run. Same idea where once I've sort of left the drama behind and I relax into that space, all of a sudden new insights are available that just aren't available. In contrast, right? I don't know about y'all, but anybody ever sat down at your desk or at your computer, either with a yellow legal pad or an open screen, and you're like, and now I will have an idea. Go. My husband and I both write books. At this moment where you sit down and it's like, I'm going to write chapter 4 today. I'm just going to sit here and wait for chapter 4 to come. In contrast to all of the 80/80 marriage was written on the trail by voice memo, where it was just that's where the ideas wanted to be, that's where they wanted to flow. And so I think to your point, this notion of when I'm able to step outside defensiveness and drama, there's just more creativity that's available.
And being conscious of our patterns. Like,
yes.
I know 100%. I was, mom born 30 years too early, Mensa smart, worked at Vogue, beautiful, elegant. Brother ran Dylan Reed. She was always smarter. I was like, this is indignant. So living through, like, she was happy when I was successful.
Yeah.
So I needed that next blue ribbon, and the next blue ribbon, the next blue ribbon, the next blue ribbon. Right. And so being aware of those patterns we were talking about, and they usually get formed in the first 7 years of life, and then just get reinforced, means that we have AI running. And as Carl Jung used to say about the shadow, he says, if you don't make the subconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you'll call it fate. This always happens to me. I always date these kinds of people. I always work at these firms. I never get the following.
Right.
Guess what? Your AI has literally programmed that to be, unless you're conscious of the pattern.
Well, I think especially when there are patterns that you're complaining about. So you can choose any pattern that you're complaining about. One that I hear all the time is that people will complain, I'm busy. Like, I'm too busy. Gosh, I'm just so busy. And then they'll, like, if you think, okay, my intention is to have space, but gosh, what I keep experiencing is busyness. The unconscious commitment to busyness wins all the time. I think because the unconscious plays dirty. Right? It's on, it cheats, it will bring in all of your parental patterns, you're not good enough, whatever it is. And so only when they're both conscious patterns. How am I creating busyness for myself? Oh, funny how anytime there's a 30-minute window in my calendar, I offer it to someone, right? Or recognizing that I actually feel like I didn't do very much in a day unless I collapse exhausted at the end and require a beverage of choice. Or just recognizing all the different ways that I do that for myself, then it's a fair fight, and it's possible for me to do something different.
There was a comment that Jerry Colonna once said, which is, he said, when you're in a boardroom or in a management meeting, and something happens. We miss sales. And all hell breaks loose, right? Are you aware of the fact? Like, well, of course, first of all, the CEO's been aware for like the last 4 weeks that he missed sales. Like, you know, the
So
VC
much for
say,
candor in that
"Did you-
boardroom."
Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see the numbers were like half what they're supposed to be. He says, it's not about the sales. Your childhood, your brother, your dad, you're not enough. It's all the patterns, and the patterns are just waiting for a gem to play in at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I'd love to kind of get if that's something you've noticed or how you see it appearing.
I think that there's certainly childhood patterns play out for sure. I think there's a question of who are you achieving for? And to really deeply ask yourself the question, am I achieving for my mom, for my dad, for my mom's dad? Am I achieving for my shareholders, for my board, for the kids in high school who thought I couldn't do it? Who am I achieving for? Gives a lot of insight into that conversation. I think the other piece that I see play out are all of our listening filters. So again, when someone says something like, we missed the numbers, who jumps on that and hears you didn't perform? Who hears you're withholding? Who hears you should have known better? Who hears you should have done something different? That we're all hearing different things, even though the same sentence was stated. And so even just being able to recognize what's the history informing your glasses, what are the listening filters, like our personality types often show up in that moment, that another person hears we missed the numbers as like, this is gonna be amazing. Next quarter, the delta is gonna be unbelievable. Right? Just recognizing how we hear it and how we respond.
And this gets back to, there's a really interesting listening exercise in conscious leadership you do. So I feel stung by something, or I want to talk about something. And so below the line is, I'm not going to be candid. I'm going to create some phenomenal story. It's usually a pretty nasty one, but it's got some nice hooks on it, and I can feel really indignant over it. And then, of course, I'm not going to show up or be present, or I'm going to sabotage or do all kinds of fun things. Again, Darwin. Oh, this is great. I got a dysfunctional organization on my hands. Now, if you were to disappoint Darwin, what do you think the approach should be in that situation?
Well, so the very first piece, I'm not sure which exercise you're teeing me up for, so I feel very nervous.
What I heard.
But I think the first thing that's really interesting is, could you reveal instead? Right? So rather than the withhold of, just even saying I feel stung, rather than reacting to, why would you say that to me? Why would you undercut me? Why would you, right? Again, notice how many assumptions are in there. As soon as I reveal I feel stung, I own that. Notice that it's really important that I don't say, you just stung me. Right? It's, I feel stung. That's an experience I'm having. Then we can choose how we want to clean it up, what the intention was behind it, what was happening there. But that reveal allows there to be closeness. Whereas if I keep that quiet to myself, again, try it on in your own experience. When you don't reveal what's actually happening, 9 times out of 10, I would say probably 99 out of 100, there's just a little withdraw. Sometimes it's a big one, sometimes it's a little one, but there's a withdrawal. And in that distance, all the projection starts to show up.
And it just drains and drains and drains. And the exercise was that notion of what I heard was, it's kind of that 3-step.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you wrote it. No, but it was the notion of, okay, I can either say, you stung me, you're a bad person, why do you always do this to me? Always, never, by the way, really good to add.
Really great drama words.
These are, if you can put them in every sentence, really good.
You should always use the word never.
Never, always. And then something very caustic with an emotional sting to it, really good. Or you can say, what I just saw was this. What I heard was this. What I felt, not you, what I felt was disappointed or hurt or let down or angry or miffed or whatever. And the story I'm telling myself is, you don't want this deal to happen. You don't appreciate me. You don't want me working here anymore, whatever. How does that sit with you? And they're like,
Well, then they can engage, then they can respond. The thing that you're doing at the beginning that seems simple, that I found to be incredibly powerful, is differentiating facts from stories. That facts are just what the video camera records, and story is everything else that I make that mean. So simple access points are, anybody who's ever gotten a text that says, call me ASAP? Anybody gotten one of those? Where did your head go? Something's wrong, they need me, it's an emergency, right? Most people go there. True story, I got a text where someone had referred me a client. I had sent the email that was like, dear prospect client, nice to meet you, my name's Kaylee, let's set up time, send. Within 1 second, I got a text from the person who had referred, call me ASAP. Unfortunately, I was walking into a meeting, and so I sat within the back of my mind like, did I spell their name wrong? Did I make a mistake? What did I do? How did I screw this up? This is certainly wrong in however many ways. An hour later, I come out of the meeting, and of course, my first call is this person was like, hey, hi. Why did I need to call you? He was like, I have another prospect. Do you have capacity? And I was like, seriously, man? Couldn't do the good news, call me ASAP. I love that story for the ways that all of the assumptions show up. All of our stories color the way that we read things. If you want to do this with your team, I encourage you to find an image. Just any image, screenshot it so that they don't know where it's from. One of my favorites has 2 young boys. One is smiling and looking directly at the camera, and one has his hand in his head like this. And I tell the team, before I tell them facts versus stories, tell me what you see in this picture. And people will write, I see joy, I see laughter, I see someone who's sad, I see someone left out, I see someone who's embarrassed. And what's so fun about it is then I say, now we're going to go back and look at this picture. What are the facts? And that I see one child looking at a camera with a smile and one child with their hand or their forehead in their hand. That's all we know. And to recognize how often in our organizations we'll also get at odds with each other around stories. Oh my gosh, as soon as we get Matt into our organization, it's going to be amazing. And someone else says, Matt? Have you seen his resume? He's way too advanced for what we need at this stage. There's this whole argument that happens. And what we don't do is back up to say, wait, which of Matt's credentials are you paying attention to? Right? What's the fact set where we can both get aligned?
and it's, as they say that, the perception is reality at the end of the day. Right? The Rorschach, you did the Rorschach test,
Totally.
right? Right? Everyone looks at the same thing and comes up with their own story, assumes it's truth, and then activates against it. How could that go wrong, right? And also, if you're not candid, if you're not intentional, if you're not conscious and open, then the entire organization is going off of different stories and is not aligned, right? So when you go through the 15 commitments, just simply say, how would this result in a more competitive firm at the end of the day that its fear-driven counterpart is going to suffer from? Versus, we need to be more conscious, it's a thing to do, it just feels good. I love the notion, I was talking to Jim, the co-author of the book, and I said, Jim, I got into what I'm doing. My core question was, please tell me that the only way to have a successful startup is not to be an anxietal asshole like Travis at Uber, right? Like, please tell me that it's not only by being fear-driven and anxietal and paranoid that you'll always kill everyone else because you're 24/7 on. And I said, also, how do you motivate yourself? And he said there are 5 levels of motivation. I don't know if you...
I don't know all 5, but I know that fear and love are at opposite extremes, and that's part of what we were talking about before. You can motivate with fear. It's just not nearly as sustainable or compelling as love.
And you know, by the way, they all have their roles, right? Like fear is good for a sprint, right? Like if the servers go down and therefore shut down the life support systems for half your patients in the hospital, probably good to get eye of the tiger, focus, right? Like you don't like, hey, let's be playful about this. Like, no. Bad example, bad choice. But yeah, he was saying, you know, there's amygdala. Will it eat me? Can I have sex with it? Right? I mean, I think it's pretty much how the amygdala thinks at the end of the day. Or will it eat me? Second was external validation, right? Which is blue ribbons. I'm like, okay, that one I know. If that doesn't work, I took my happiness and I literally handed it to you. Because I'm like, oh my God, her chin is on her hand. She is so bored. Oh my God, is there anything I can say? Is there anything you're really curious about? Third is internal, purpose, mission, bliss. Well, first of all, none of us here, very few of us know what our mission and purpose is. So you're like just frustrating people. Playfulness was the fourth one. I'm like, okay, you lost me. He goes, no, curiosity. I do this because I'm so curious about being the best XYZ. Huh, that didn't work. Really curious. And then the last one, as you said, is love. I so love doing this that I can't think of not doing anything. You know, I can't think of doing anything else but this, right? Bliss or passion. So as I was going up, I was like, oh, we all kind of stop at the mission, purpose one, but this curiosity element is the one I bang on my kids a lot about. Like, I suck, I got the wrong test. I'm like, great office, I did a great opportunity to learn, right? You know, it doesn't always go well, but get playful, talk to the teacher, like go through the test, how not to have this happen again.
I think that that one is most easily seen in retrospect. That in the moment itself, sometimes it doesn't feel awesome. So the story I love to tell is that we live up in Boulder, and we were part of the flood where, you know, took out 18 inches of our drywall, like we lost all our carpet. I'm carrying it out on my shoulder, and Diana, the third author of the 15 Commitments, called me. She's like, this is so exciting. What are you learning? I said, how much carpet weighs? Call me later. And so there's this moment in retrospect where without that experience, I wouldn't have grown, right? For many people, there's sort of a fork in the road moment. If there hadn't been the, like, wait a second, the blue ribbon is untenable, you wouldn't be here. And so I think there's some grace to be had for each of us in those moments where it's tricky, I'm stuck, I'm below the line, it doesn't feel fun, it feels like whatever it might be, it's to me. If I can make that shift to say, there's something in here for me, let me see if I can find it.
So, I don't know, how does this all sit with you all?
Yeah. Double thumbs up from the back. I'm going to call that a win.
That's a win.
Excellent.
What are they thinking? We didn't do enough. He's not there.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, 15 commitments can feel binary, and sometimes it can feel sort of untenable to practice it all the time. How can I use it daily? And I would say choose a commitment, any of the 15, and practice noticing where you are. It's not wrong if where you notice you are is below the line, just to get familiar with that pattern. And if I could be so bold, I think it's Barry, is that accurate? The one I'd recommend for you is play.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a fan. I have your chart, your detailed chart in my office on the wall. Obviously, 1,000 people to a little 3-minute video.
Oh, thanks.
If you haven't gone
ATLPT? Oh, got it. Wow, you have an acronym that I didn't have. Thank you. None of the 15 commitments is original. That all of the tools have been out in the ether for much longer than I have been alive. Many of them came from Gay and Katie Hendricks. Some are explicitly from Byron Katie. Others were from Michael Beckwith. And so the idea with 15 commitments is not that we have brand new unique content. It's that in putting it in this particular format, people seemed to be able to access that body of work in a way that perhaps they hadn't when it was disparate and in many places.
So specifically the above the line notion.
I learned the line from Gay and Katie Hendricks about 20, maybe 25 years ago. I don't know who they learned it from, but my guess is it's been out there a long time.
And then I think we have to wrap up so we don't
Okay.
get everything. But
So we don't get in trouble.
But I'm obsessed in this world. There's a company called Heroic.us. Brian Johnson and Blink has summarized 600 of the top books. It punishes to mark the way of the seal, and then done 101s of 10 books and big takeaways. And the thing I've realized is this stuff doesn't change over the last 2,000 years. And above the line, below the line, you could say Marcus Aurelius. I mean, there are a million things from the Stoics.
Yeah.
They would say about equanimity and getting yourself grounded. Aristotle, I have arete tattooed here, the highest version of yourself, living virtuously, right? And he talks about the virtuous mean, not too much, not too little, right? So I think each generation creates a different metaphor and framework so they can better contextually understand it. What I loved was as I was going through it, this is one of the best frameworks because I was like, oh, that's Carl Jung's shadow work. Oh, that's right. And I was like literally able kind of to point to it, but you guys did such an amazing job cohesively activating it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome.
All right.
Off we go.
Thank you, everyone.